food security to me is really about the availability, so having sufficient quantities, the access, so people being able to afford as well as have the ability to purchase the items, the utilization of the food, so it must be safe, prepared without contamination, and the stability, the confidence in those systems that food will be there. And despite those potential shocks to the critical infrastructure or the economic crisis, or even a conflict where there's a cyber incident and the system's taken out. So it's really how do we harden up those four key areas and make sure that we are food secure as a country?
This is KBcast.
Are they completely
As a
cybersecure?
primary target for ransomware campaigns,
Is
that's used to
security and
point
testing and performance and scalability.
risk and
We
compliance.
can actually automate that.
Take that data and use it.
Joining me now is Amberley Brady, founder at Realfoodprice. And today we're discussing the next national security crisis isn't military, it's food. So Amberley, thanks for finally joining me and welcome.
Hello, KB. Thank you for having me. And I'm so excited to be on your show. I know it's been a long time coming, so awesome. I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Well, definitely worth the wait, because one thing that's really interesting about this conversation is I haven't actually spoken about this topic. I've spoken about every other topic you can think of, but not this one. So I'm really keen. I think it's going to be quite an exceptional interview. You obviously got a very strong background with your pedigree and also your experience. So I want to start there. Now, you sort of say, Amberley, and you've been giving a few talks in the space at the moment locally in Australia. You say that hunger is a national security issue and the threat is at our doorstep. So I want to explore this a little bit more. What does that actually mean?
So for me, I just want to take you back to COVID-19, KB. So you would remember how quickly things started to fall apart in our supermarkets. And that kind of thinking of, okay, I need potatoes, or I need to go to the store and I need to source this particular item. Now, you will remember that when we went to the stores, things weren't on the shelves, right? And why was that? Because there are systems that underpin the delivery of those items that are exceptionally fragile. And so for me, that is a national security issue in Australia. Through something like COVID-19, we ran out of food. And it wasn't necessarily that the food wasn't there, it was not getting to us. So thinking through that, there are a number of different systems that underpin that. So why is that a national security issue? Because if we don't have food on the shelves, we can't eat. And to me, the most dangerous people are those who are looking at starvation, because once you are in that mindset, it's all bets are off, right? It's kind of like the Hunger Games of sourcing different items for you to eat overnight. It's those fragile food systems that are underpinning the critical infrastructure to bring us those daily items. And we take it for granted because it's just always been there. And until it wasn't, we hadn't really had a taste of what that kind of anarchy could look like. And it really was anarchy and difficult for us. You know, with toilet paper, we saw there were fights in the stores. And recently, you know, in Japan, there was a rice crisis, and it was the same behavior. Straight up, people running to the stores and were not able to get the rice that they were after. So there are countries who are working hard to ensure food security. And why I'm working in this space is really to get people to come up and think about, okay, what are we doing? How are we doing this? How are we ensuring that food's available? What are we going to do? And there's a number of different sections to this, and how we create that relationship is so vital to how we move forward as a country. So there's the security elements to it, of the critical infrastructure that delivers this food to us. And for me, I really want the security community to focus on this as not necessarily like, it's not at the back of your mind. We really need to put it to front and center. So that's really it, KB, from my perspective. So do you remember COVID-19? Do you remember sort of when you were running to the store?
Yes. People now, when they live in the US, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember Australia. I remember people going nutso about toilet paper.
We're like one of the only countries that are food secure. So we don't need to be like that. And which is the wildest part, because we create our own food and fiber. We actually feed 70 million people. So we're not going to run out. But what will happen is there's the potential for extreme shocks in our infrastructure, that the items won't necessarily get to us. And it could be that a particular store down the road does get those items. And why does that store get the item and not us? So why do I have to drive around in my car to find potatoes when we have systems there that should be working more efficiently to get these items to us? And the systems, so food security to me is really about the availability, so having sufficient quantities, the access, so people being able to afford as well as have the ability to purchase the items, utilization of the food, so it must be safe, prepared without contamination, and the stability. And that's what I'm talking about, the confidence in those systems that food will be there. And despite those potential shocks to the critical infrastructure, so like a natural disaster, so you could have the floods or the fires that we've had, or COVID-19, or the economic crisis, or even a conflict where there's a cyber incident and the system's taken out. So it's really, how do we harden up those 4 key areas and make sure that we are food secure as a country? I'm not sure what's happening in the US on the day-to-day, but I've seen that DARPA's doing a lot of research in this space. So they're heavily looking into agri-tech, spending a lot of money on that. And so, yeah, I just don't know what you're seeing on the ground, if there's anything kind of...
Well, there's a lot of food stores here, and there's a lot of fresh food. So anyone that thinks it's all about fast food, there's not where I live in Florida. But I think that the conversation around when people behave like that, that's the part. There's a couple of things that you said in there that I want to get into. What would you attribute to why people were reacting such an extreme way? Like toilet paper. And I remember even my now husband going to this, where I used to live in Sydney, it was like a local IGA. I had to like ask the lady, and she knew me, and then she's like, oh, we've got some at the back. Like as if I was importing something illegal or something. And she's like, I can't show anyone. And I'm literally, there's a photo of me carrying it down the street in a box to conceal it in case, someone wanted to try, pretty much. And I've never experienced something like that. And I'm just curious, why did people react to that level, in your opinion?
Well, there's a number of issues, right? There's a lack of trust in the information that comes out, I think. And our systems aren't working well. It's not working well because this is not a really sexy area, is it? Food security. It's not anything that's going to really excite people. It's lacking the awareness and that sort of excitement to plan and to have the education and to have that messaging and the trust in the information that's coming out. And the areas that do this sort of the food security, that focus on food security in Australia, really need to work better, in my opinion. So there needs to be more integrated planning and sort of joint risk assessments to identify the vulnerabilities and to be able to sort of explain those to people, because we don't know what's running out and when it's going to run out. And when it does run out, it's like panic, right? We run and grab more toilet paper than we could ever need, and people were hoarding it. So people had and I think that's why your local IGA was kind of dealing it in that way, because people were stockpiling and sort of doomsday behavior. And it's because there is this lack of trust in the information that's coming out. And there's a reason that we don't trust that information around the food supply, because we see how our farming community is treated by these sort of large corporations, and the way that, the information, there's this distortion because farming, for example, I sat down with Melons Australia CEO, John O'Davy, and over the summer months, melon growers were being paid 40 cents a kilo. The cost of production is $1.50. And on top of that, they have to pay transport costs to the distribution center. So there's a cost there on top of what they're getting paid. And outside of that, all year round, we were seeing pricing around $1.99 to $2.49 for melon, a kilo, watermelon. So there are farmers who are not being paid adequately, and we don't necessarily trust the information because we know that's happening. And you and I know that the farmers are being treated badly because the farmers are coming out saying, help us, we're going to not have any money. We're not going to be able to continue supplying you fruit and vegetables because we're not being adequately looked after. So when we hear from some of the largest supermarkets that things are as they are, we don't trust the information. And who are we to trust in this space? And that's where there's this kind of interjectory between, agriculture, policy, security, that I think we need to, as a community, in the security community, really figure out how we can do this better. And the security community has been well and truly trusted. it's demonstrated that it's trustworthy. So we need to work better in this space, really. I think that's how we do it, KB. There's, how can we work better? Integrated planning and assessment, so joint risk assessment to identify the vulnerabilities within the critical infrastructure, looking at, climate threats, supply chain disruptions, which are the cyber sort of the security elements. Australia could look at having strategic reserves. So that's like a resilience planning piece where there's seed banks that we already do have, but having food reserves. And it was interesting the other day, I was talking to someone who said we have, and I think it's publicly out there, I've seen it somewhere else, but I can't remember the source, but 22 days of, I think it was petrol reserves. So we also need to consider how reserves could be used as a diplomatic currency in terms of we could also be giving this out to our close Asia-Pacific partners. How do we make sure that we look after those people? Because we're feeding 70 million people with what we're creating in Australia. So it's not just Australian people that are benefiting from what we have. And also looking at sort of investment alignment. So a piece between, defense and hoard innovation, how we can look at better the investment between the different spaces that they're doing in the food security, making sure it's a national security approach, because hoard innovation have amazing stuff going on there. So does defense. But it's really about how do we invest and align that investment, looking at tech infrastructure protection, so the security of the systems. And my personal favorite is the data sharing and intelligence coordination, like my platform, Realfoodprice, where we coordinate that information and have those discussions like I demonstrated with Melons Australia. And they are really like industry are ready for these discussions. So it's really about pulling all the people in. And that's what I look at my position here is I look at that strategic alignment piece where pull in defense, pull in hoard innovation, pull in our amazing industry groups to represent our farming community and to really be that consumer advocacy piece, because there just are so many barriers. So it's hard to get clear and concise data on food pricing. And why is that? Why is this hidden from us? And who benefits from hiding it? Because once you hide this information, you're able to control and manipulate and avoid accountability. And really, there are commercial outcomes that are benefiting from this. And it should be an Australian approach. It should not be commercial outcomes. It should be that we benefit as the consumer. And I know I'm kind of going on a bit of a soapbox here, so cut me off at any time, KB, because I feel like I'm kind of talking at you. But it's really a shared experience that we've all been through, COVID-19. And I thought coming out of COVID, we'd all fix this. But I think we all moved so quickly and so happy to get out of it that we were like, right, okay, it's not so bad anymore. And we all sort of forgot. And that's why I really want to drag back those. I don't like living in the past, but I like to drag back that feeling of when we were on the street with our toilet paper during the hustle trying to get home to survive. Because think about that on a grander scale and it's dire. I don't want to think about the world that we're going to leave if we don't start doing something now. And it is a crawl to start with, but we really need to. The rest of the world is doing something. And even if they're not, we need to.
Look, and what you're saying makes sense, right? So there's a couple of things I want to double click on. Now, when you're saying items running out, are you more concerned, or what's more likely to run out first? Is it condiments? Is it just fruit and vegetables, so fresh produce? Is it personal hygiene products? Give me sort of a ranking system.
So I haven't looked at, that resilience piece, like what will go first, right? But the things that matter are the things that are going to provide real nutritional benefit primarily. And the issue with that is the systems they're not well organized in a way that we will always have supply. So there's oversupply issues where there's too much. And I was talking yesterday with someone in the tomato industry who said that they would have tons and tons of tomatoes that were perfectly fine that they would have to throw out because they were rejected. So
why were they rejected? Because there's just too much of them. They don't have enough.
When they were sent to the distribution center, they were deemed inappropriate for whatever reason.
Is that because they're shaped weirdly? I think that there is...
No, and this is what they said. There was an oversupply. And with the contracts, the way that the contracts had been written is that they don't have to accept them because there's rolling contracts with different suppliers. And if there's an oversupply, they don't necessarily have to take the item. There's no onus on that to be carried through. So there's a lot of waste out there, which is horrendous. So we could be doing so much better in this space and looking at that supply. Why do we have these many items coming on at the same time? And so there's ways around that. We could have planning across the whole of the agricultural space, like people having a joint calendar saying, this is when my crop's coming on, this is where I'm sending it. There hasn't been this unified approach to food. And this is sort of one of the benefits of doing that. You can strengthen those domestic resilience pieces. So for me, we are food secure as a country, which is great. However, we need to strengthen our domestic resilience. And so that would start with, looking at the policy coordination, the strategic considerations. So the food reserves, export controls, price stabilization mechanisms, which is like my platform, Realfoodprice. But out of those, you could have calendars of how products are going to come on. So Joe blogs down the street, his tomatoes are coming on the 12th. I'm going to send them to the distribution center then. And, KB's tomatoes coming on the 12th. Oh, okay. Well, we need to send them differently because otherwise you're competing against someone, same product. And maybe just because yours gets there first, a day before the other, it can be rejected, right? So you need to have those. And then it goes into the B grade market where it may just be purchased for juices or sauce, but they're not getting that the prices that they should. And there's often no course for them to sort of ask why. They're just rejected. They don't get an explanation. So we really need to research these strategic considerations here and we can innovate. So there's this place for the tech bros, right? So that's kind of what I've been doing with the piece that I've written about Help Me Tech Bro, because there's biosecurity, plant health, international engagement pieces, supply chain resilience. There's so many opportunities for the tech world to jump in here and help with systems, because there is this pivot away from it being agritech, which is that umbrella term really for anything that the application of technology or, what that tech in kind of ag is. And really agritech is anything. So it's like the GPS, the drones, satellite imagery, automation, robotics, AI, IoT devices, but, it's evolving. And so there's that supply chain integration. There are farm tools that are integrated with farm management. So it's evolving into a systems focus. And that's where I really see that the security of those systems is going to be vital, and really calling out for the tech bros to come and help us in this space, because there is just so much opportunity. And it's a lot of other countries have realized that. So the UK are focusing on agricultural digital technology and their strategy forward for that. There's just so much opportunity for us to do better as a country and do better for our farming community who have been there. And those farmers have been there through drought, through fires, through COVID-19, and they would endlessly send these items to us. And it wasn't that they weren't being supplied during COVID-19, it was that it couldn't get to us because the fragility of the supply chain. So there's just, the barriers here they're not things that we can't solve. It's about really putting that nous and how do we address them. And the tech industry has, we've seen it with financial services, we've seen it with transportation, we've seen it, when they brought Uber in, we've seen them disrupt industry amazingly over, the last 20 years. And agriculture really has its moment. And I want everyone to focus on it because it's imperative we get this right. This is not something that we can mess around with. It's food. It's vital. And it's ensuring that our next generation can eat and afford to eat. Because going back to kind of, what I said in the beginning around that availability and the access, we have sufficient quantities, but we need to have people being able to afford as well as having the ability to purchase it. Because you could be surrounded by fresh, beautiful fruit and vegetables that are pristine and incredible. But if you can't afford the $12 cabbage, you're not going to buy it. You're going to buy the 90-cent noodles and live off something so unhealthy. And, I remember and think back to the days in uni when I ate tuna and noodles. And I think I couldn't have done that forever. But at the time, when you're budgeting, fine. We've all lived through that. But people are going to make the decision to buy the medication instead of buying fruit and vegetables. And I just think this is not the Australia I grew up in. This is not the Australia I want to live in, and we deserve better. And I really want to help our country get to a position where food is available for all of us. It shouldn't be, it should not be a privilege to be able to eat. And even the United Nations, which was interesting, someone pointed out to me the other day, potatoes are listed in the United Nations as a staple. So it's a human right to have potatoes, which I found was amazing. But there are rights associated with access to food. And I think we can do that better.
So going back to your tomato example that was rejected, what happened to those tomatoes?
They were thrown out at the farm, literally on the side of the farm. And he was saying it was just it's debilitating when that happens, because it's like they've all worked. This whole farm and production have just thrown them on the side. And you may have seen images in the past of people dumping produce, perfectly fine produce that they just can't sell. So if they can't sell at the first market, and the secondary market is there's an oversupply, which is like the B grade fruit, then there's nowhere for it to go. And then they have to pay for it to come back to them. So imagine you've worked so hard and you have all these people there helping you to get this produce, and you get it there, it's rejected. Then it's rejected a further time from a market. And then it's like, well, what do you do with it? You can't eat tons of tomatoes. So it just gets dumped. We can do this better. Like, KB, come on, we can do this better. We all know how to recycle food in our fridge. So how can we recycle this on a larger scale better? So yeah, it's just wild to me to dump this sort of stuff. And why, when we need these items, and if we don't need them, then let's have a look at why we don't need it. But we need to figure out a way forward that's going to work. And it's really, how do we look at that? Strategic considerations around the policy coordination in Australia, and who owns it, and how to get that kind of funding alignment so that there's accountability, and that they're going to focus on it, because everyone's sort of working in a siloed approach. And I'm not going to sit there and say government can work better, but in this space, it absolutely can. And when we have amazing tech out there and amazing abilities to get data and amazing ways to sort of address all these issues, we can strengthen our domestic resilience. And I feel like I'm sort of that person that's doing the call to action, saying, come on, we can do it. I built Realfoodprice. I went out there and I spent my own money to build it. And I worked every night, getting little bits together. And I had a team putting it together, but I would work on that because I felt I had to demonstrate to the larger community that it can be done. You just have to think about it, invest a bit of money, and really kind of look at that policy coordination piece. Getting the data, it's out there. It's about creating the relationships and how we can innovate, looking at other countries and what they're doing. So my model was based on the Hungarian model, which within the first 3 months, it saved €50 million for the consumer, because the items listed on their platform dropped. Because as soon as you remove the murkiness around the pricing along the supply chain of the food, that value chain, as soon as it's clear, the murkiness disappears, you're able to see where the markup is and why, and ask those questions. Why? Why is the farmer getting such a small amount? Because there's nothing in Australia that's currently doing that in terms of the food transparency. And that's why I built it, because we need to keep more farmers in these roles. And how do we do that with an aging workforce? They're not going to want to farm the land. And if they can sell those farms and make a profit for more housing, we will run out of arable land to do the farming. And then what do? What do you eat when you don't have land to farm on? So once you start digging in at KB, it becomes really dire. Like, you actually realize, oh my gosh, this is really, really bad situation, and it's a crisis. And we've all been kind of on this false sense of security around it. And the more that I dug into this space, because I really just started to want to make more money for farmers, and to have more clarity as a consumer. But the more I dug in it, I realized this is a crisis, and it's a silent crisis, and it's creeping in for the rest of us. And we're not looking at it and fighting it hard enough. And it's time that we go hard on it.
If you're working in AI, machine learning, or data science, you're likely already handling sensitive information. Proving your security and compliance posture? That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta helps AI-driven teams fast-track compliance. Think SOC 2, ISO 27001, GDPR, with minimal disruption to development. Visit vanta.com/kbcast. vanta.com/kbcast to learn more. So I want to explore with you like the supply chain. So like when it gets to we're buying it in grocery stores. So let's go back to the farmers. So crops are being farmed on their turf, on their farm. A couple of problems come to mind, and you can speak in more fidelity than I can, but one of which is climate change. So it's like, oh, it rained for 3 months in New South Wales. We can't grow anything. It washed out the crops. The second problem that I've also heard is we can't get the people to pick the fruit because people in Australia don't want to do it. But then we tried to get people from overseas in, but then we couldn't do that because now there's a lot of visa restrictions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So walk me through what's going on in your mind at that juncture.
Sure. So we can outsource some of these roles to tech, right? And that's around that labor piece. So there will be tech that comes in and there's assets that will help with some of the labor, but there's security backdoors that we need to really investigate, because if we're importing tech from a particular country, we need to make sure that what we're getting is okay and that there's not going to be kind of, because for an example, there's automated tractors that we could use, and that would take a lot of, the manpower out of planting and turning the soil. But it's connected. So where's that system sit? What's the IoT information being fed back to this other country? So there's that side. But then also, yeah, absolutely, there's these climate change. I mean, you could call them climate change issues, or there are also just bad seasons, right? So what we're seeing now is the potato season has been particularly rough. And I know I've gone to buy potatoes and they haven't been available. And sometimes the prices have tripled, right? So it's crazy pricing for potatoes. So there's all these different kinds of ways that we need to look at the system. But what happens when there's a potato shortage around the country? We look at a different area. So at the moment, they're being supplied from South Australia and Tasmania, where they would have traditionally come from Melbourne or Victoria. And what has happened to some of those items is we're getting, B grade potatoes and we're paying a premium for them. And they're ugly. I mean, they're deemed the ugly kind of veggie, but people have to have it. And that's fine. People are still eating them and nothing's happening.
But does it matter if it looks like, because don't you just eat it? If you cut it up, does anyone know? Like, is there really maybe?
No, there's no difference. It's bizarre. It's purely that we have been lulled into this idea that we only eat pristine fruit and vegetables. And I mean, who would have pushed for that, KB? Who do you think's pushing?
Large supermarkets to sell them and to mark the price up.
Well, exactly. You want to sell a premium product because you can put a premium on top of it. If you're selling something ugly, and someone was laughing about it yesterday, they're like, you could go to a farmer's market and sell something as a farmer and say like, oh, it's this and this and this and all these kinds of things. And people love it because you're there. So the supermarkets have worked out that their point of making a larger profit is off perfect, right? So they want only perfect items to sell. And that's kind of, then they've got the imperfect range. And I'd like to think that they do support the imperfect fruit. But if you have a look, it's blemish free. And if it has a blemish, they put a note there saying why it's blemished. So there's this creation of perfection that's kind of dripped into society around our fruit and vegetables, which is, I don't have a problem with eating something that's not perfectly formed. The fruit and vegetables that I would consume, I use a thing called box divvy where I get my fruit and vegetables from, and I pick them up from a local woman once a week, and I place my order, and I wouldn't have a clue if it's ugly or not. It's just they go out and they source what they can and at a good price, and they support farmers that are a part of this collective. And I just think that it's been a sort of an artificial kind of belief that everything has to be beautiful in our stores. Our fruit and vegetable has to be incredibly, an A grade.
But I just think when you cut it up, how would anyone know? If you go to a restaurant, you're just seeing the end product. It's been sliced and diced or it's put in something. Does it really matter at the end of the day? Like if it doesn't look aesthetically pleasing?
I mean, what are we not putting our fruit and vegetables on the table and displaying them? So it's kind of like it's being eaten. And there is absolutely no reason that this is kind of playing out. And maybe that's something we need to figure out as a country. Why are we kind of going down this avenue? A lot of other countries aren't like that. If you look at fruit, I know when I've been to the Pacific Islands and they've got the beautiful fruit out on display, it's never, pristine. And a lot of other countries aren't like that either. So I think there's this kind of relationship that we've developed with that kind of pursuit of the perfect fruit and vegetables, but it's not reality. And fruit, it just seems like a waste of time for everyone. And also it's unachievable, I think, in the long term for farmers. How are they going to achieve that without, very strict like biosecurity around their plants or only particular kind of varieties? Like we will see less varieties too, because people won't be wanting to explore what works better and what to grow if they think that they can only sell it at a premium. So we're doing ourselves a disservice in the variety of vegetables that we will receive. And that's the other thing, when you go into the supermarkets, you don't see the variety that you used to. It's just like the navel orange. And there's so many different kinds of fruit and vegetables out there. And that's what I love about Asian markets, because they have all the different types of fruit and vegetables that you don't necessarily see. So I actually go to the fruit and vegetable markets, the Paddy's markets, often in Sydney. So there's one in Flemington, there's one in the city. And I love seeing what's available because there's a larger availability. And people just need to be clever and sort of say, okay, I don't want to necessarily go for convenience, and really enjoy that journey with discovering food and how it really looks like. Because I spend a lot of time now engaging with the farming community and horticulture. And it's really interesting about what people are picking and what they're growing and how they're growing it. And I think, maybe it's not what everyone wants to do on their Saturday and their weekend, fair enough. But when it comes down to the nutrients that go into your body, you really need to focus on those and having a look at what we're going to have in the future, because we may do ourselves out of a particular product if we're not buying it just because it's not, being sold.
So now I want to focus on distributing those products. So via truck, I'm assuming. So even sometimes when I was traveling locally in Sydney, I'm like, oh, look at these huge trucks. Obviously, they're transporting food in them. So then there was another, you would have heard when the economic crisis started happening, with fuel or gas prices started to increase, which put more of a toll on trucking companies, logistics companies, to get the food from a farmer that gets trucked into Sydney, that gets dispatched in the supermarkets there on a daily basis. That apparently attributed to the price increase because the fuel cost more. So that's the other problem that I'm seeing in the supply chain. So I'm keen to explore that with you as well.
So there's costs to moving everything we do, right? And when so I'm not a specialist in fuel pricing, but when anything goes up, there's always going to be a premium that has to be thrown on top, right? So even when you move, I know that if you're when everyone was moving through COVID-19, do you remember the cost of a removalist went up something crazy? So if you wanted to move your items just around the corner, I know we moved during COVID and we paid, and we're less than half an hour, 40 minutes. We paid $1,700 or $1,800 to move, whereas now it's much cheaper. So I think in terms of getting anything and having access to fuel, there's always going to be that fluctuating pricing. And how do we look at creating that kind of addressing that fluctuating of price? We really need to dig further into those costs, and they're available. People know what they are, and people do take advantage. And I'm not saying that that's across the transport sector, but people within supply chain can take advantage of those sorts of things on the TV. So it may not necessarily be reality. It may not actually be reflected, and we don't have that evidence. We just know that prices for fuel would go up. So we don't have that hard, no one's done that sort of back end calculation. But I think that there's a particular group that are looking at the narrative around that. And there's a lot of finger pointing from, particular groups around what the pricing, why the pricing's going up. So I think through establishing systems where it does look at that cost implication and removing the murkiness around the costs, we will have a better understanding of what's actually happening, because we can't, and it goes back to that trust piece at the beginning we were talking about, who do we trust in this space? And I know that the mum and dads out there that are farming, the mum and dad operators of truck companies and things like that, they're just like us. They've all got a role in this, and they're all getting paid and working hard to ensure that things come to us. And there are people out there, corporate groups that are, and you only have to have a look at their end of year financials, and you know that there are bumper profits. And if you ask why and where that money's coming from and start looking back from there, you'll realize that there are profits being made. So how do we look at where that markup is, right? We have to look at food pricing, and then you look at the costs outside of that too. And there are, there's levies that the farmers have to pay as well. There are all particular levies that go to helping their industry. So they'll, citrus has a levy for research and development into different varietals. But really, I think we all know who's making a lot of money, and it's in those public documents that are out there, and asking for a demonstration around how we can look after our farming community better, and how we can, as consumers, have more understanding around what the prices are. So there's a lot of policy considerations, but for me, the national security of our food security is imperative, and we need to look at how we can make sure that we ensure that food security and that accessibility, the availability, and the stability of, ensuring the confidence in the systems that food will always be there despite any of those potential shocks. And there will be fluctuations, absolutely, through natural disasters or economic crisis or a conflict, but we have to make sure that our system is resilient enough so that we don't have those issues with COVID-19. And if petrol prices go up, then it's easy to see that it's gone up for a period, and then when it comes back down, we should be able to see the pricing come back down. But it just hasn't been demonstrated, KB. And I just think that that's something we have to do better. We have to do better in this space. And through what I'm trying to do, that's what, I feel that we'll get there.
So now I then want to focus at the customer, at the coalface. So we go in store, we want to get something, people are working professionals, both parents are working, they're busy, they're just going to go to a local supermarket because it's down the road from where they live. Then, look, I haven't lived in Australia for 3 months, but I was aware that the cost of just buying something has substantially changed since I was a kid. A lot of people struggling. It's too much. It's too expensive. And one thing that's really interesting to draw a parallel, people have been asking me, like, what does food cost in the US, even with the exchange? So I'm still paying 1.5 of the exchange rate because the US dollar is stronger. I do think it's cheaper overall to buy food in the US than it is in Australia. And people are shocked from that because they're like, oh, but I thought there was less of it. The other thing is there's so many supermarkets here. So if you don't like one price, you can go somewhere else. Not that I would do that because it's about time, but there is options. In Australia, there's really two big players that are controlling that market. So then we've had the government come out to Albanese and friends saying, hey, we're going to stop the food price gouging. What does that look like in your eyes?
Well, I'm really interested to see how they're going to do it, because unless you really focus on the national security, and I keep saying that, but the national security of our food, which has to address price stabilization mechanisms, then what does this look like for us, right? And it's shocking that the US has more. It's not just UKB. I've heard it from other people that availability of the food, the organic food, the quality that they have, and the price is just much better in the US. And why is that when we're food and fiber secure, right? And I also remember as a child, like you said, things being so much cheaper and having more variety and having more options of where I would buy fruit and vegetables from. And I remember all the local grocers, and I specifically try to support local fruit and vegetable stores. I try and support, things like Box Divvy. I try to go to different locations to shop, because we really need to stop this kind of toxic relationship that we have with what's happening, and look at sort of how, as on the human level, we can better support our country. Because we are really, Australian people are really proud of their produce. And how do we make sure that we are looking after the farming community who have always been there for us? So we need to start asking those questions. what are you doing in terms of this food securities piece? And I know that they've established the Food Council and there's been 13 representatives across that. So I'm really interested to see what the government's doing there. And they've put $3.5 million to that. But really understanding what's next for us. And it's dire that we do something now. It's not something we can wait. If the rest of the world is already doing it, we should be there. We need to start pushing for it. So maybe it is about people saying, okay, I'm in the US and we have better food here. And it is about looking at what other countries have. And I've lived in Norway that don't grow any, not that they don't grow anything, but they grow very limited in comparison to Australia. And the things that they do grow in Norway, you know, there's a price for them, but the import price of items is also cheaper than would be here. And that's kind of weird to me, right? Why are they getting something from Spain and it's cheaper? I remember talking to my friend. She was telling me the price of pineapples and I was like, oh my goodness. And they're imported. So the price of pineapples in Australia was more expensive at the time. And I was like, why is that? Why are they more expensive? And if it is more expensive and we're growing it here, we need to fix it because there's something not right. There's something very, very, very wrong. And we need to figure it out, KB. And that's why I want the security the community in with me, and I need them to work with me, and we all have to work together because this isn't something I can do alone. We need everyone on board. And it's about building the relationship between policy, agriculture, and security. And how do we do that better?
So what happens if the farmer says, well, I don't make any money, Amberley, I've given up, I'm stopping doing something else? Then we can't get food into stores. It becomes like COVID-19. It's the Hunger Games all over again. You know, people, so do your food, like people start getting hangry pretty quickly. So what does that then look like? Just say, you come talk to me and say, hey, the food supply is substantially limited now. Like how quickly does that have impacts on other areas of society, on Australia? What does that then look like? Walk me through how you see it given your background.
I think it's incredibly dire because once you remove the availability and access to food, people do crazy things, right? And you only need to understand like other countries when they've gone through lack of food and access, and you know what happens from what you've seen on TV. It can be anarchy pretty quickly, and people are throwing around all sorts of measures that, okay, we're only a couple of days away from anarchy, and I truly believe that could happen. There are countries that have crazy inflation on pricing, crazy, like 1,000% inflation on some other countries that you can kind of Google and see. And I just don't think the Australia that I love and that I'm proud to be part of wouldn't let this happen. So I don't want this to happen for our country. You know, we've got a lot of different things happening geopolitically, but I do not want my country to not fight this. So we can fix this situation. It's not, you know, it's not broken, it's bent is what I like to say. The system's a little bent, but we can work through it. So there's so many positives, which, you know, we are food secure. It's great. Like this is amazing, but we have to strengthen the domestic resilience and start, you know, that policy consideration, the strategic considerations, the research into these different kind of considerations. And that's where we can innovate and really pull ourselves out of something that I feel like we're falling into pretty quickly. We need to put a stop to it and address, you know, accessibility and affordability. So yeah, there's a lot of work here, KB, but we can do it. And so that's, I guess, you know, the North Star is like, it's not lost. We're not lost yet, and we can start. So we're in a crawl at the moment, and then we'll start to, you know, walk and then a run is how I look at it. We'll start. Is there a part there that I've missed out? Crawling, walking, running? I don't know, but hopefully not. But you know, I'm ready.
No, that makes sense. I want to close now with just how do you think we got to this point? Is it just your big supermarket conglomerates controlling the price of food? Like cheese is getting beyond crazy now. Like it's like $10, $11, $12. And I didn't even shop that often. So when I was going in there, I'm like, this is nuts. And I can't imagine people with, you know, multiple kids and things like that. So like I said, I'm spending less money here in the US with the conversion than I was like in Australia for two people.
It's crazy. So it's been economically, I think the last 20 years where the most in history, the economic standard of which we've lived in, and you and I have grown up in, KB, has been some of the best in history, probably the best. So we've never had to really focus inward on productivity and looking at, what as a country we're doing. But it's changed over the last couple of years, and that's, one part of it. So the economy has changed. On top of that, we've seen large organizations pushing out smaller suppliers of food and buying up large land reserves and buying up and having, a lot of market share. And we haven't seen any large participants into Australia for reasons I'm not 100% sure, but there are reasons that they're not getting in. They can't buy the land to have the stores because, if you're going out there to swamp your competitor, you would buy everything up, wouldn't you? And that's just a strategy. And they've just been so clever in that strategy. They've played it and they've really tugged on the heartstrings sort of in terms of there's nothing to see here. There's no problem because everyone's happy. But that's because there's a favoritism to particular suppliers. So some suppliers are telling us they're not getting their produce purchased. And then there are ones that are always consistently being bought from. And they're the ones that are, you see there's advertisements where people are happy and smiling with working with these organizations. So there's a lot going on within that kind of narrative of what's happening. But what we need to see more of is the accountability of what's happening and figuring out who's accountable and how do we look at what's happening closely and really digging into the data because the data's there. So farming community have to use like distribution, so a platform to provide their pricing and their items, and they get a very clear printout of what it is, but they're also sworn to secrecy in terms of what they're allowed to talk about. So they're scared to talk. Farmers are scared to talk through because of repercussions to them. So they won't be purchased from and that someone else will be. So there's a lot of tactics here that we need to stamp out that do not happen in other countries. And there's regulation in Europe around the farm to table and how you can engage with European markets. And maybe that's something that Australia needs to look at. But we definitely need to implement a system. And I think it's a mixture between the Japanese and the Hungarian models. The Japanese have an incredible model where there's sort of the 3 layers of the way things move, and they've got a much larger population of 120 million and, all the islands. So if their costs of fruit and vegetables are able to be tracked and have that information, there's no reason we can't. Because if they can do it on a scale times 4 or 5, what we have, so why can't we do it? And then if Hungary can actually look at the pricing mechanisms and see milk drop 12 points within 3 months, why can't we do it? So it's really about working out how we can work together and having that kind of the strategic relationships internally and looking at our domestic market and the resilience of that.
This is KBcast, the voice of cyber.
Thanks for tuning in. For more industry-leading news and thought-provoking articles, visit kbi.media to get access today.
This episode is brought to you by Mercsec, your smarter route to security talent. Mercsec's executive search has helped enterprise organizations find the right people from around the world since 2012. Their on-demand talent acquisition team helps startups and mid-sized businesses scale faster and more efficiently. Find out more at mercsec.com today.